The fateful night, the Texas evening, was uncharacteristically quiet, the kind of heavy silence that seems to hold its breath before tragedy strikes. Beyond the rolling fields and white-fenced paddocks of the Harper family ranch, the distant neigh of horses echoed across the open land, mixing with the scent of earth and hay. Emily Harper, the only daughter of John Harper, the respected ranch owner, felt a knot of unease as she made her way across the moonlit yard, her boots crunching on the gravel path. Inside the grand but aging farmhouse, the air was still. Glasses from a small family gathering earlier in the night sat on the kitchen island.
Did you hear that?
Half filled with bourbon and sweet tea. The family had only just toasted John's health and reminisced about the ranch's storied past. Yet Emily noticed the subtle tensions beneath the surface. Sharp glances exchanged between her Aunt Margaret and Cousin Daniel. Whispered conversations that ceased whenever she entered the room. Around midnight, as she finished stacking the last of the dishes, a chilling scream shattered the calm. Emily dropped the heirloom plate she was holding, the crash drowned out by the sound of hurried footsteps upstairs. Without hesitation, she raced up the staircase, her heart pounding in her chest. In her father's study, she found John Harper, collapsed beside his desk, his weathered hand clutching a blood-stained handkerchief. The tall window behind him was thrown open, letting in a gust of cold night air. For a moment, time stopped for Emily. Every childhood memory of laughter in that room, every lesson learned at her father's knee, all pressed in on her as she knelt beside him, desperate for signs of life. Within moments, the rest of the family spilled in, Margaret trembling, Daniel pushing past her, Uncle Thomas making a quick call for help, his voice strangely composed. Emily tried to revive her father, her hands shaking, her mind a whirl of panic and disbelief. But it was too late. The sheriff arrived with an ambulance not long after. Flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows on the porch. As Emily answered the initial questions, offering what little she knew, Margaret sobbed dramatically, casting suspicious glances in Emily's direction. Daniel loitered at the doorway, silent but watchful. What should have been a private moment of grief quickly spiraled into something darker. With almost clinical detachment, the sheriff questioned Emily alone, noting inconsistencies in her timeline, details she couldn't recall amid shock. A neighbor, lured by the noise, whispered about old family grudges and Emily's rumored disagreements with her father over the will. That night, as her father's body was taken away, Emily stood numb on the porch, the biting wind stinging her cheeks. Behind her, relatives spoke in hushed, speculative tones, whispering about motive, inheritance, and secrets better left buried. The warmth and comfort of her childhood home seemed to evaporate, replaced by an atmosphere thick with suspicion and betrayal. Yet, even in the depths of her grief, Emily recognized something else. A flicker of resolve ignited within her. She would clear her name, no matter the cost, and one day expose the shadows lurking in her family's heart. Leaving home. The days that followed John Harper's funeral drifted by in a blur of shock and resignation. The stately rooms of the family ranch, once alive with laughter and the warmth of shared memories, had grown cold and alien. The scent of lilies from the memorial service hung in the air, mingling unpleasantly with the sharp aroma of paperwork and whispered accusations. Where there had once been the comforting echo of Emily's childhood, now there was only isolation and mistrust. Rumors cut through the town of Willow Creek faster than wildfire in the Texas summer. At the feed store, in the church steps, folks spoke in low voices about the tragic Harper family business. Some remembered Emily as the clever girl who read law books under the oak trees. Others now stared at her with thinly veiled suspicion, whispering about greed, betrayal, and unseen motives. Overnight, her name became a topic for gossip she could not outrun. In the family's lawyer's office, the blow fell hardest. With a steely voice, Aunt Margaret presented the legal documents, disputing Emily's share of the inheritance, citing the ongoing criminal suspicion surrounding her father's death. The attorney, his tone apologetic but firm, explained that until her name was cleared, Emily would have no legal claim to the ranch or any of John Harper's assets. Emily's protests rang hollow against the lawyer's implacable professionalism and the stony faces of her relatives, who seemed more interested in closing doors than seeking justice. Every room in the farmhouse echoed with echoes of the past, framed photos of county fairs, the worn banister on the staircase, where her father used to lean and tell stories. Each familiar spot now felt like enemy territory. Even the ranch hands, uncertain and uncomfortable, avoided her eyes. Some whispered that she brought misfortune on the place. The nightly tension boiled over during her final dinner at home. Margaret's voice, clipped and cold, cut through the silence. "It's best you go, Emily. Until the sheriff finishes his investigation, your presence only stirs up trouble." Daniel watched silently, his eyes betraying neither sympathy nor malice. Uncle Thomas, previously her quiet supporter, merely nodded and looked away, unwilling or unable to defend her. Packing her suitcase felt surreal. Every object, a childhood horse-riding ribbon, a photograph of her father, teaching her to saddle a Mustang, even a faded quilt, became weighted with meaning. She hesitated over each memento, torn between the need to hold on to her identity and the dread that anything she treasured could be used against her. In the end, she took little more than the bare essentials and a few items that seemed to anchor her both to the past and to the hope of one day returning with her name cleared. On the morning of her departure, the sky was overcast and threatening rain. Emily stood for a long moment on the porch, her suitcase at her feet, and the open road stretching before her. The ranch sprawled out behind her, unchanged, yet wholly transformed in her eyes. Not a word was said as the family closed the door behind her. The click of the latch final and absolute.
Where am I going?
She climbed into her old pickup truck, the engine's familiar rumble a lone comfort, and drove down the gravel road that had been the backbone of her life. Every mile away from the ranch was a mile into uncertainty. Would she ever return? Would the town remember her as a villain or as a survivor? In the rearview mirror, the white fences faded into the haze, but the determination burning in Emily's chest grew stronger with every passing minute. Grief and anger gave way to a steely resolve. She promised herself, staring straight into the stretch of unknown highway, that she would reclaim her life, her dignity, and her father's legacy, whatever the cost. At the edge of town, a battered "Welcome to Willow Creek" sign flashed by, and Emily allowed herself a final glance backward. She was not running away. She was fighting for the chance to return, not as a shamed outcast, but as the rightful heir and the woman her father always believed she could be. Rising in the city, Houston was a world apart from the windswept ranch lands of Emily's childhood. As she approached the edge of the city, the endless Texas plains melted into a jungle of steel and glass. High-rises glittered under the morning sun, traffic hummed in steady rhythm, and people pressed forward with purposeful urgency. A city indifferent to heartbreak and full of restless ambition. Emily arrived with little more than her modest luggage and an even heavier heart. At first, the city seemed overwhelming, almost predatory in its pace. The tiny apartment she managed to rent near the university was cramped but clean, located above a laundromat whose humming machines became her midnight lullaby. New noises filled her nights, the rumble of passing trucks, the distant wail of sirens, the streetlights' orange glow through thin curtains. All of it reminded her how far she'd traveled, from the comforting creak of the ranch house porch and the soft nickering of horses outside her window. Determined not to allow past injustices to dictate her future, Emily threw herself wholly into rebuilding her life. She took a job as a paralegal for a small but reputable law firm, her days a cycle of research, filing, and absorbing the unspoken rules of the legal world. At night, she attended classes at the University of Houston, poring over textbooks and case law until her vision blurred. Her natural intelligence and resolve caught the attention of a few professors, some of whom became her earliest mentors, offering encouragement when exhaustion and grief threatened to consume her. Surviving in Houston meant hard choices. Funds were tight, but Emily mastered the art of frugality. Thrift store suits, homemade sandwiches, long hours at the campus library in place of costly textbooks. Despite these sacrifices, there was comfort in her routine. Each minor victory, aced exam, praise from a supervisor, a new legal principle mastered, gradually stitched her confidence back together. Making friends didn't come easily. The trust she'd lost after her father's death left her wary of intimacy. Still, a few classmates saw the tenacity behind her quiet, attentive demeanor. Gradually, Emily assembled a modest circle of friends. Another paralegal who shared her late-night workload, a fellow student from rural Oklahoma who understood what it felt like to be an outsider, a neighbor with a love for jazz and a habit of leaving fresh muffins outside apartment doors. Their small acts of kindness became touchstones against her persistent loneliness. Yet the shadows of the past never fully lifted. At times, a news story about inheritance fraud or a stray comment about family betrayal in a class debate would send her spiraling back into painful memories. The smell of hay drifting from a city flower shop, the sight of a sunburnt ranch hand at a bus stop could summon a wave of homesickness so fierce it was almost physical. But rather than running from that grief, Emily learned to channel it, letting it fuel her studies and sharpen her resolve. Years went by. Exams, internships, and courtroom observations propelled her forward. She developed a reputation for meticulous research and unyielding ethics, the type of law student who always volunteered for the hardest assignments. Her mentors, recognizing not just her intellect, but her moral backbone, encouraged her to specialize in civil litigation and wrongful convictions. On the day Emily passed the Texas bar exam, she didn't celebrate in grand fashion. Instead, she walked the busy downtown streets, feeling the city's pulse, letting herself believe, if only for a moment, that she had earned her place in this world by merit, not by name or blood. That evening, standing on her apartment balcony, she looked out at the maze of lights and allowed herself a brief, bittersweet smile. The past was still there, coiled and patient, demanding justice. But now, Emily had become something new. Not the frightened, shamed daughter forced from her home, but a woman armed with knowledge, forged in hardship, and ready to fight. The city hadn't erased what she'd been through. It had made her stronger, sharper. Houston had given her the tools she needed for the battle she someday knew she'd face, the battle to reclaim her dignity, her inheritance, and, above all, the truth. The first clue. Years passed in Houston. But even as Emily climbed the ranks of her profession, the shadows of Willow Creek never fully let her go. The city was relentless, demanding, thrilling, and often unforgiving. But at night, when the world quieted and the streetlights flickered outside her apartment window, she still saw the worn walls of the ranch house and heard the click of her father's boots on the old floorboards. The ache of unresolved loss had become a companion she carried everywhere. One wet Thursday afternoon, as Emily was reviewing deposition transcripts in her law office, her desk phone buzzed. She almost let it go to voicemail. Her days were consumed by paperwork and endless deadlines now. But something about the unfamiliar number caught her curiosity. With a practiced lawyer's composure masking an undercurrent of fatigue, she answered. To her surprise, a gravelly, anxious voice, tinged with the twang of Texas, crackled through the line. "Emily Harper? That you, miss?" The name sent a strange chill down her spine. Will had been one of the old hands, quiet, loyal, and usually invisible in the background of family gatherings, always quick to tip his hat to Emily when she rode by as a girl. He'd slipped away from the ranch not long after her father's death, like so many others. Emily's mind raced. Why now? Will, I remember. Is everything all right? She managed. No, ma'am. Don't suppose it is. I hate to call you out of the blue. Will's voice faltered, and for a moment, all she could hear was the fuzz of the phone line and the hum of Houston rain against her window. I never thought I'd get myself mixed up in something like this, but I got something you ought to see. Don't mean trouble. Just figured you deserved to know the truth. Her heart thudded. She kept her tone steady, even as a flood of hope and old caution threatened to break through. What kind of truth? A pause. Then words quietly tumbled out. About your daddy. About that night. And a letter I found in the hayloft not long after he passed.
Where am I going?
Never knew what to make of it till recently. A letter. After all these years. Emily's lawyer's mind whirled through possibilities. Was it a threat? A confession? A clue left on purpose? Or by accident? She forced herself not to sound desperate. Where are you, Will? They agreed on a diner in a quiet stretch of Highway 290, halfway between Houston and Willow Creek, a spot as anonymous as it was familiar to locals. That night, Emily drove with knuckles tightly clenched around the steering wheel, headlights carving a narrow path through rain-kissed darkness. Nostalgia and dread twisted together as the city faded, replaced by lonely stretches of highway and fields occasionally illuminated by sheet lightning. The Silver Spur Cafe was just as she remembered from her teenage years. Vinyl booths, buzzing neon sign, and the lingering scent of fried food and cheap coffee. She spotted Will right away. Years of outdoor work had carved lines deep into his face, but his eyes were shrewd as ever. He wore a faded ball cap and clothes that looked too big for his wiry frame. They exchanged wary, polite greetings. Emily sensed he was as nervous as she was. After ordering coffee, neither finished. Will finally produced a battered manila envelope from inside his jacket. He slid it to her under the cover of the table. "I kept this all these years. Guess part of me was scared to get involved." He took a shaky breath. "Your father, he trusted the wrong folks, Miss Emily, and I think he knew something bad was coming." She opened the envelope with trembling hands and found a single sheet of paper inside. A letter, written in her father's unmistakable script. The date was just 3 days before his death. The words were brief, but laced with dread. "Emily, if anything happens to me, know that it wasn't an accident. There are things at stake here I can't explain fully. Trust no one. Not Margaret, not Daniel. I have left documents with Will. If you ever need them, he'll know when the time is right." There was no signature, but the looping strokes and careful phrasing were undeniably her father's. Emily's throat tightened. For years, she had only her instinct and a deep sense of injustice to sustain her. Now, for the first time, she held evidence, however cryptic, that backed up everything she had feared. She looked up sharply at Will, her lawyer's voice rising above personal emotion. "Did you give this to anyone else?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Just kept it safe, like he said. Your pa gave me a key that unlocked his old lockbox out by the feed shed.
Dad,
The night after the funeral, I checked it, and this was all there was. But now, things have started happening. My tires slashed, somebody asking nosy questions about you and your daddy. Figured you ought to know." Emily's thoughts raced. The letter was a lifeline, but it also threw open dozens of new questions. What documents had her father hidden? And where? Who else might know about the letter Will had protected all these years? Most crucially, who among her own blood had been so desperate as to frame her and seize the ranch?
Just need to clarify
Suddenly,
a few details, ma'am.
the familiarity of the cafe faded, replaced by the awakening of her old legal
This timeline
instincts.
just does
She
not
took
add
out her
up.
phone, snapping careful photos
not
of
sure
both
what
the
you
letter
mean.
and the envelope. She asked Will for every detail.
It's about old
When he'd found the
family
letter,
grudges.
what he remembered of her father's final days, even the smallest things that seemed odd at the time. Will described a visiting stranger arguing with Margaret on the back porch, the presence of an unfamiliar truck parked far from the house, and a night when the padlock to the feed shed hung broken, as if someone had rifled through it in a hurry. They spoke in hushed voices for over an hour. Emily's questions grew sharper, more methodical, as she pieced together a pattern from Will's stories and the timeline she'd never been able to explain. It became clear that her father had suspected someone close might betray him, but he'd been too proud or too afraid to share everything directly. Instead, he had arranged for clues to be hidden, relying on the last people anyone would suspect to keep them safe. As the rain let up outside, and Will glanced nervously at his watch, Emily felt an unfamiliar surge of hope. For so long, she had been trapped by doubt and the impossibility of proving her innocence. Now, with this note and Will's testimony, there was a renewed sense of purpose, a tangible lead. "Thank you, Will, for your courage and your faith in my father," she said softly as their meeting ended. He looked away, but she could see relief in his posture. She left the Silver Spur that night with the envelope pressed against her heart and headlights licing through the thinning mist. For the first time in years, a plan began to take shape, one that would wend its way through hidden records, old friends, and the secrets of her own family. The city had hardened her. The law had armed her. But it was her father's quiet trust and a stable hand's simple loyalty that had given her the first real weapon in her fight for justice. Driving back toward Houston, Emily realized that the story wasn't over. Not for her, and not for her father. The first clue had surfaced. Fragile, but undeniable. The quest for truth had only just begun. Returning to Texas, summer in Texas announced itself with a swelter that crept into Elm. Every inch of air, drawing sweat from the living and heat from the ground. As Emily steered her well-worn Ford back west along Highway 290, the world outside her windshield evolved by the mile, from Houston's bustling concrete veins to the wild tangle of prairie grass and the dusky silhouettes of cattle wandering the open range. 1,000 memories thundered beneath her composure as she crossed the invisible border back into Willow Creek. Every mile brought the past closer, detail by vivid detail. The towering pecan trees shading winding rural roads, the weathered clapboard churches, the hint of barbecue smoke on the breeze. She had left this place as an outcast, her name soiled, her inheritance seized, the weight of her father's mysterious death pressing her into exile. Now she returned as a woman transformed, older, harder, tempered by years of grueling legal work and the relentless pursuit of truth. Rumors of her return traveled faster than her truck's tires could carry her. At the gas station just outside town, the attendant, a high school classmate she barely remembered, politely avoided her eyes, but couldn't resist a startled, "Emily Harper, you back for a visit?" She forced a professional smile. She would need every ounce of poise she had learned in the city. Willow Creek, she knew, could be as unforgiving as it was gossipy. Her first stop was the modest bed and breakfast run by an old family friend, Mrs. Lopez. Emily booked a room under her own name, letting word spread. She wasn't here to hide anymore. The old woman greeted her with an embrace tinged with motherly concern and a whisper. "Not everyone's forgotten the truth, honey. Some of us know what was done to you." Emily nearly buckled. The validation, so rare, was a balm after years of doubt. News of her return blazed through Willow Creek's close-knit community overnight. At the diner the next morning, conversations grew hushed as she entered. The clink of coffee cups, the darting glances, the unspoken challenge in the air, all pointed reminders of her disputed legacy. Even so, Emily sat tall, ordering her coffee, answering greetings with composure she wore like armor. But not everyone was pleased. Her Aunt Margaret, now presiding over the Harper Ranch with icy authority, wasted no time. That afternoon, Margaret arrived at the inn, accompanied by Daniel, her son, a tall man with a relentless gaze and a handshake that felt more like a warning. Their exchange was brittle, full of thin politeness and barbed undertones. "To what do we owe this honor, Emily? Surely you're not here looking for more trouble," Margaret said, her voice as sharp as ever. "I'm here for answers, and for my father's name." "I assume you have nothing to hide," Emily answered, her tone cool but unmistakably confident, the voice of a seasoned attorney. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. The tension radiated from every lintel in the bed. House. The standoff was brief. Margaret and Daniel left with veiled threats and forced pleasantries. But Emily could sense the storm brewing beneath their manners. Whatever they were hoping to keep buried, her presence threatened to dig it all up. Determined to reacquaint herself with the town, and to show she wasn't afraid, Emily spent her days walking the familiar streets and the grassy country lanes. She attended Sunday service at the little white church her father used to favor, feeling the silent scrutiny of neighbors, old and new. Some nodded a quiet welcome, others turned away or offered strained, embarrassed smiles. Emily recognized the balance of allies and enemies
Did you hear that?
had hardly shifted
I heard it.
since her exile. After years of urban anonymity, the intimacy of her hometown was both suffocating and clarifying. Every handshake, every shared glance was a negotiation. She listened closely, gathering scraps of local news and gossip at the barber shop, the library, the farmer's market. Old childhood friends had married, divorced, started families of their own. The world had moved on in ways, both subtle and unmistakable. But under the routine rhythms of Willow Creek, Emily sensed the quiet resistance of those who remembered her father with respect, and of those who profited from his absence. On a walk around the boundaries of the Harper ranch, she met with Ben, the foreman who'd managed the ranch's daily operations since John Harper's death. Their conversation was careful, but revealing. "Not much has changed, Miss Emily. Just the faces making the decisions," Ben said, flicking the brim of his hat. "There's money running through here now. New investors popping up around every corner.
Dad,
Your
come on,
Aunt
please.
Margaret's always got a lawyer nearby, and Daniel's been hiring folks that don't look like they know a horse from a hay bale." Emily took mental note. Patterns began to emerge from these fragments. Shifts in payroll, rumors of outside buyers, unexplained gaps in the
I do not
ranch's
know.
books. The Harper Ranch, once a symbol of stability, was now rife with uncertainty and ambition. In the evenings,
this
Emily
happened.
worked from her room, compiling notes, cross-referencing property records, legal documents, and any public filings she could access
We just need
online.
to clarify a few
She
details,
set up
ma'am.
clandestine meetings with townsfolk willing to
I
talk,
already told you everything
creating
I
a
know.
web of contacts,
This
old
timeline
ranch
just
hands,
does not add up.
distant cousins, even a retired
I'm not
sheriff
sure what you
who
mean.
remembered the night her father died with uncomfortable clarity.
It's about
Each
old
encounter
family grudges.
added another brushstroke to the mural of secrets and lies that had flourished in her absence. One night, a trusted friend from the local paper slipped her a series of unsigned letters, anonymous warnings, threatening anyone who questioned the official story of John Harper's death. The implication was clear. Someone in Willow Creek had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. Yet beneath the surface, hostilities grew small moments of hope. The daughter of the eight said, town's doctor brought over fresh-baked bread and a shy note of support, quietly recalling how Emily's father once saved the family from foreclosure. An elderly man who'd driven a delivery truck for decades handed her a yellowed photograph of her as a girl atop her favorite horse, whispering, "We always knew he was proud of you." All the while, Margaret and Daniel tightened their grip, publicly downplaying Emily's presence and quietly trying to rewrite the Harper legacy in their favor. Emily responded not with drama, but with methodical preparation. Each day was a test of patience, composure, and the law itself. By the end of her first week back, it was clear she would never reclaim her birthright by appealing to sentiment or tradition. The world she returned to was colder, more calculating, but so was she. She needed to be as relentless as the heat outside her bedroom window if she hoped to succeed.
Did you hear
One
about the
humid
Harper family
evening,
business?
standing in the
It's truly a
fields
tragic
behind the
situation.
inn, as the sun slipped
always
beneath
knew
the
something was
horizon,
off.
Emily finally allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, the doubt, pain, and righteous rage she'd carried for so long. Yet now, for the first time since she left Willow Creek, hope staked its claim inside her. She could sense it in the way old friends looked at her, in the quiet courage of those who believed in justice. Returning home was just the beginning. The next steps would be harder. The amassing of alliances, the unearthing of records, the strategic chess game with her own flesh and blood. None of
Emily,
it would be
until
easy.
your name is
But
cleared,
as the
you have no legal
fireflies
claim to
flickered
the
over the
ranch.
tall
No,
grass,
that's not right.
Emily knew she was ready for the fight. The prodigal daughter had come home, not to beg or apologize, but to stand her ground.
The dragon
This time,
finally
she was
found
armed
its
with the
treasure,
law, and with a
hidden
resolve
deep
no
within
one,
the mountain's heart.
not even her own family, could shake. Reopening the case, the Texas dawn crept over Willow Creek with a sticky warmth,
I don't know what you
bathing
mean.
the land in a golden haze.
I didn't see
While the
anything.
town slowly stirred to life, Emily's mind
Virgin.
was running miles ahead, already busy drawing red lines and connecting dots on the legal pad
This silence is
spread across her
unbearable.
rented room. The clue
Just
from
gonna
Will,
sit here?
her father's
Can we please
desperate
not do
letter,
this again?
had fractured the foundation of everything
best you
she'd
go,
been made to
Emily.
believe. For years, suspicion had hovered in the shadows. Now, Emily had the first threads in her grip, and she intended to unravel them all. What began in quiet determination soon became a methodical, all-consuming pursuit. Emily knew that sentiment and suspicion were not enough to reclaim her name or her inheritance. She needed hard evidence, investigative rigor, and allies who remembered old debts or harbored their own buried grievances. Above all, she needed clarity for what had happened that terrible night at the Harper Ranch. Her first move was to hire
I
a
can't
private
keep this here.
investigator,
It's
a discreet
evidence.
woman from Houston named Callie
But
Boyd,
it's also me.
who specialized in difficult family cases with a reputation for fearless tenacity and absolute confidentiality. Callie arrived in Willow Creek with little fanfare, blending easily into the landscape with her jeans, boots, and slow, observant drawl. Together, she and Emily mapped out every piece of the puzzle they had so far. Will's letter, the missing documents her father hinted at, the mysterious appearance of new investors on the ranch, and the anonymous threats circulating around town since Emily's return. Fresh eyes made a difference. Callie started where official investigators had long ago stopped looking. She interviewed the old ranch hands, many of whom had moved on or kept silent out of fear. Some now felt safer talking, especially to a stranger with nothing to lose. Bits of testimony surfaced, the unexplained presence of a stranger's truck parked on the back lot the week John Harper died. Unfamiliar voices overheard in heated arguments near the barn after midnight. A ledger rumored to have surfaced, then vanished, showing irregular cash transfers around the time of John's death. Meanwhile, Emily found herself digging through the town's legal archives. Days melted together as she pored over property deeds, bank records, and probate files in the stuffy, dust-choked rooms of the county courthouse. On some days, she'd catch a clerk giving her a sideways glance, clearly torn between curiosity and small-town wariness. But she pressed on, armed with the patient perseverance that law school and years of adversity had honed. Patterns began to emerge. Large swaths of the Harper land, once held in John's name, had quietly been optioned for outside industrial interests in the months before his death. There were signatures from Margaret and Daniel on notarized documents, all executed suspiciously swiftly after John's funeral. In the bank statements she managed to subpoena, Emily found large cash withdrawals made from family accounts just days before and after her father's passing. There were clear signs of collusion, but without the missing documents referenced in her father's letter, the complete picture still eluded her. At night, Emily and Callie compared notes under the dull lamp in Emily's room. The inquiry took on a rhythm, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but always progressing. Callie, with her direct approach and instinct for reading people, unearthed more. A recently fired stable hand admitted to overhearing Daniel threatening John about not holding the family back. Another worker claimed he'd seen Margaret burning paperwork behind the guest house late one evening, though he hadn't dared to get closer. One evening, after another long day of research and conversations in shadowy corners, Emily received a call from Callie, her voice urgent but measured. "Just found an old friend of yours, Tom, the ranch bookkeeper. He's been gone a few years, but he's back in the area, and according to him, carrying secrets too heavy to keep." The next morning, they met Tom at a rundown breakfast diner. His hands shook as he nursed his coffee. Tom's confession, halting at first, painted a clearer image. John wasn't planning on changing his will, not really, but he was putting things in place to protect you, Emily. He found out about Margaret's negotiations with developers, something about drilling rights. He told me to make copies of the ledgers and put them somewhere safe if anything ever happened to him. 2 days later, the safe in his study was empty, and Margaret had locked down access to every record. Tom produced a flash drive, battered nearly beyond recognition. "I only dared make a small set of backups, always meant to get it to you if I saw you again." Emily's hands shook as she accepted the device. Her first tangible step toward reconstructing the financial truth her family had hidden. Spurred on by this breakthrough, Emily pressed harder. She subpoenaed email trails, quietly involved trusted legal contacts in Houston, and began assembling a case of circumstantial and direct evidence. The files from Tom's flash drive revealed a pattern of payments to shell companies traced back to Margaret's and Daniel's accounts, along with forged signatures and falsified board meeting minutes. But as Emily's legal net tightened, so did the sense of danger. Mysterious phone calls in the dead of night, unfamiliar cars parked for hours across from the inn, a stone hurled through her window with a scrawled note, "Leave it alone or else." Callie insisted on changing their meeting spots daily and background checking everyone they spoke to. The escalation only confirmed they were onto something vital. Despite fear and fatigue, Emily soldiered on. She gave sworn statements. She mailed copies of every document and testimony to multiple lawyers in Houston and Dallas, ensuring the information could not disappear if she did. Each night, she added another layer of evidence to the caseboard she'd set up in her room, the strings and pushpins now sprawling into a web that implicated her aunt, her cousin, and several outside actors. Every breakthrough deepened her complex emotions: rage at the betrayal, sorrow for her lost father, and occasionally hope that justice could finally be realized. Yet, amid the whirlwind, Emily retained her steeliest resolve. She could feel her father's presence with her, not in the voices of doubt, but in the fierce drive to protect the legacy he'd worked a lifetime to build. By the end of summer, her file was thick enough to convince a district attorney to review the case. New headlines began to swirl in the regional papers. Harper family death, back under scrutiny. Fresh evidence in ranch scandal. Margaret and Daniel's attorneys issued harsh denials and thinly veiled threats. But the tide was shifting. Even old friends who doubted Emily now began to approach her with wary support, offering pieces of information or simply the kind of nod that meant, "Keep going." Emily knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time since that dreadful night, truth was no longer out of reach, and her father's voice, at last, was about to be heard. The reopening of the case had become more than legal strategy. It was an act of justice for a family and a town. long haunted by secrets and lies. Legal revenge. The decision to take her family to court did not come easily to Emily. The Harper name was stitched into the very fabric of Willow Creek, its history, its culture, its reputation, and dragging it through a legal battle meant exposing herself to both public scrutiny and personal risk. Yet, as the evidence mounted, it became clear that hard-won justice would only be served through the full measure of the law. In mid-September, the air heavy with the promise of autumn, Emily filed her civil suit, a sweeping legal complaint naming Margaret, Daniel, and multiple accomplices in conspiracy, fraud, and wrongful deprivation of her inheritance. The courthouse, usually a sleepy fixture, handling land disputes and traffic tickets, buzzed with anticipation. As word spread, townsfolk gathered in small knots on Main Street, gossip crackling like brush fire. The Harpers' lawsuit was the talk of 3 counties, a real-life drama that pitted a returning daughter against her own flesh and blood. Emily's legal tactics were as meticulous as they were relentless. Drawing on her years in Houston, she assembled a legal team known for their integrity and commitment to civil justice. At the heart of her strategy was a mix of emotional restraint and unwavering professionalism. Her aim wasn't mere revenge. It was to reclaim the legacy her father built, secure the truth, and restore her own name. The opening salvo came in the form of detailed discovery motions, demands for emails, financial records, and confidential correspondence stretching back years. Emily's team, assisted by Callie the investigator, pored over every transaction, every change in land title, every late-night text exchange between Margaret and Daniel. Each new bit of evidence was logged and cataloged, the paper trail slowly revealing the mechanics of the scheme that had deprived Emily and John Harper of their rights. Margaret's lawyers responded in kind, filing countersuits and seeking injunctions to block evidence or delay court proceedings. Daniel sat stone-faced at every preliminary hearing, his silence calculated to project innocence. The courtroom became a battlefield, a place of clashing arguments, veiled threats, and procedural maneuvers. Emily learned to trust her instincts with every glance, every deposition, acutely aware that her family was fighting not for justice, but for survival. Throughout each deposition, Emily remained composed. She listened as Margaret recited half-truths with a confidence born from decades of family authority. She watched Daniel dodge questions or offer rehearsed denials, the flicker of guilt nearly always masked by indignation. Their lawyers blustered, deriding Emily's claims as the bitter imaginings of a prodigal daughter. But Emily was prepared. She cross-examined witnesses with a calm, incisive tone, never rising to anger, but always cutting to the heart of every evasion. Crucially, she refused to be baited by family drama. In her filings and her testimony, Emily returned time and again to the facts: the letter from her father, the missing financial ledgers, the paper trail of payments to shell companies. Each exhibit was presented not as vengeance, but as truth, crying out to be recognized. The most dramatic moments came during the confrontations between Emily and her aunt. Weeks of legal maneuvering culminated in a bruising, day-long deposition, with Emily pressing Margaret on the night John Harper died. She asked about the burning of papers, the visits from unknown investors, the quick transfer of property titles. Under oath, Margaret's composure frayed for the first time. Her answers began to falter, her confident mask slipping as Emily's relentless questioning and documentary evidence backed her into a corner. Outside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. The town's deep divisions, always below the surface, erupted into open debate. Some argued that Emily was tarnishing the Harper legacy with her determination to win at all costs. Others quietly admired her for doing what no one else dared, standing up to power and rooting out corruption, even when it wore the mask of kinship. Emily's days blurred together with motions, hearings, late-night meetings in law offices, and strategizing with Callie over weak coffee. The threats continued: a slashed-teeth tire, a nasty rumor, an anonymous note warning her to drop the case. Yet none of it deterred her. If anything, the resistance only clarified her purpose. For every obstacle, there was a countermeasure: an affidavit from a former ranch hand, a discovery request for previously hidden bank accounts, a financial expert's testimony mapping out the flow of laundered funds. In one of the most pivotal turns, a forensic accountant hired by Emily traced key funds to accounts controlled by a shell company, one tied directly to Margaret's signature and Daniel's phone records. The paper trail matched Tom, the bookkeeper's flash drive, reflecting the hurried withdrawals made right before and after John Harper's death. Meanwhile, Callie's continuing interviews surfaced a reluctant but credible witness, a former family attorney who, under confidential protection, admitted to being pressured into notarizing fraudulent documents by Margaret. Day by day, Emily's case gained gravity. The local press began following the hearings, and soon, regional coverage spotlighted the Harper scandal. People who once whispered in market aisles began to speak up, emboldened by the courage Emily displayed. Her fight resonated with those who'd suffered injustice in silence, those who, for years, felt powerless against bigger names, old money, or the threat of small-town retaliation. For Emily, legal revenge was never about personal ruin or Pyrrhic victory. She made it clear, publicly and privately, that her ultimate goal was justice: to restore the integrity of her father's name, to provide for the ranch's workers who'd been cut adrift, and to ensure that the Harper legacy was not rewritten by lies and greed. As the lawsuit advanced, Margaret and Daniel's defenses fractured. Emails were produced under court order, showing clear intent to defraud. Witnesses stepped forward, confirming that John Harper had expressed fear and intent to protect Emily's interests in the final days before his death. The town, once divided, began to side with truth over tradition. Through it all, Emily never lost sight of dignity. She counseled her legal team to avoid mudslinging and focus on the evidence. When asked by reporters how it felt to turn on her own family, she answered, "If my family stood for honor, then honoring them means facing the truth, even the ugliest parts of it." Her quiet strength became a beacon, not just for those wronged by the Harpers, but for anyone who'd been outcast, betrayed, or gaslighted by the people closest to them. In the end, Emily's campaign of legal revenge did not just shake the foundations of the Harper family. It set a new precedent for holding the powerful accountable. Her name, once linked to scandal and suspicion, became synonymous with courage, perseverance, and justice hard won. As the final hearing approached, Emily knew there was still a long battle ahead, but she had done what her father would have wanted. She had refused to bow to intimidation, refused to accept defeat, and used the very tools of the law: rigor, truth, and relentless advocacy to reclaim not just what was hers, but to right the wrongs that had poisoned her family and her hometown for too long. Her legal revenge was not the end, but a reckoning, the beginning of Willow Creek's long journey toward healing and the first step for Emily in finally finding peace. The fateful trial. The courtroom in Willow Creek's small, stately courthouse had never seen a trial of this magnitude. The morning sun streamed through high windows, illuminating pews packed with townsfolk, journalists, and a line of attorneys on either side of the aisle. In a county accustomed to handling neighborly land disputes and petty thievery, the proceedings against Margaret Harper and Daniel Harper for fraud and conspiracy had become a spectacle, a theater in which the town's deepest secrets would finally be aired. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, every feature composed. She wore the same fitted navy suit she'd worn for her Texas bar admission, a quiet signal to herself that she had earned her place here, not just as John Harper's daughter, but as a lawyer in her own right. Behind her, Callie scribbled notes and coordinated the steady flow of witnesses and evidence with quiet efficiency. When the judge entered, an aging, stern-faced local known for his impatience with theatrics, the entire crowd stood. Proceedings commenced with the reading of charges. The crimes laid out, down to the smallest misappropriated dollar, and every forged signature, left a hush in the air. Margaret held herself rigidly upright, chin lifted in defiance, while Daniel avoided his cousin's eyes. Opening arguments set the tone for what would follow, a relentless confrontation of truth and lies. Emily's lead counsel was measured and direct, laying out the motive, the means, and the calculated actions taken after John Harper's death. The defense, meanwhile, cast Emily as a vengeful outcast, unfairly scorned and desperate to regain what she believed was her due. Then came the meat of the trial, days of testimony from ranch hands, bankers, former family friends, even the county clerk, who'd notarized crucial documents. The testimony was sometimes dry, at other times blistering with drama. One by one, witnesses took the stand to describe the tense months before John Harper's death, Margaret's unusual late-night meetings, Daniel's sudden spending sprees, payroll records that vanished and reappeared with altered figures. Emily's hands sometimes balled into fists beneath the table as she listened, but she never once interrupted or showed anything but steady resolve. The judge noted this. Even the town gossips, who in years past had whispered behind her back, now watched her with a respect begrudgingly earned. A pivotal moment arrived mid-trial, when the prosecution called Tom, the former bookkeeper. Tom's nervousness was palpable, but Emily met his gaze with a quiet nod of encouragement. His testimony was clear and precise. Mr. Harper told me, if anything happened to him, to make sure these records made their way to Emily. He feared he'd be pushed out of the business. And then, after he died, I found the ledgers gone, and Margaret in the office with the developer's men. He handed over the flash drive. Every document it contained was entered into evidence. Margaret's attorney launched a blistering cross-examination, but the facts on the digital ledger could not be explained away. Payroll transfers to offshore accounts, ledgers that tracked sudden withdrawals and land transfers, all appeared on courtroom screens, every detail corroborated by records from Houston banks. Then came the expert witnesses, the forensic accountants, and handwriting analysts. Their testimony confirmed, beyond reasonable doubt, that John's signature had been forged on critical documents. Margaret's defense tried to dismiss it as an accounting mistake or clerical sloppiness, but the evidence mounted. The emotional climax arrived when Emily herself took the stand. The courtroom stilled as she answered questions about her bond with her father, her expulsion from the family, and her years spent reclaiming her name. Her voice was steady, but full of humanity. My father lived for his land and his people. He was no fool. When he told me to trust no one, he was afraid for me, and for everything he'd built. This isn't just about an inheritance. It's about the truth. It's about justice. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to rattle her with insinuations of greed and ambition. Emily met each question with calm clarity, returning always to facts. She described the night of her father's death, the isolation forced upon her, and the hope sparked when disparate evidence finally began to fit together. Public interest in the trial spiked as the local news carried daily summaries, and townspeople camped out overnight to secure seats. Old friends of the Harpers sent notes of encouragement or appeared silently in the gallery. A group of ranch hands came in on their day off to show solidarity with Emily, sitting in the back row, their hats in their hands. Finally, it was Margaret's turn to testify. For years, she had ruled the Harper household with regal certainty, but now her confidence wavered. Under oath, and faced with reams of documentary evidence, Margaret's explanations faltered. When confronted about the burning of papers and suspicious meetings, her answers grew vague. The jury watched her every move, sensing the cracks beneath her composure. In closing arguments, Emily's counsel appealed not only to the letter of the law, but to shared community values. He reminded the jury that justice, in a town like Willow Creek, was rarely an abstract notion. It was the backbone of trust, the basis for all that made the land worth defending. The defense, in turn, clung to accusations of disloyalty and the chaos that public shame would bring the family. The jury retired to deliberate. An exhausting silence fell over the courthouse. Emily sat surrounded by her team and a handful of allies, memories of her entire journey. Houston's lonely nights, the secrets uncovered, her father's lost laughter, swirling before her eyes. Hours ticked slowly by before the jury reemerged. As the foreman stood to read the verdict, Emily felt her pulse roar in her ears. Margaret and Daniel stared straight ahead, rigid in their seats. We, the jury, find the defendants, Margaret Harper and Daniel Harper, liable for fraud, conspiracy, and wrongful deprivation of inheritance. A collective exhale swept the gallery. Men and women, young and old, sharing tears, relief, and reunion. Margaret's mask finally slipped, revealing defeat in the slump of her shoulders. Daniel, silent until now, looked not angry, but lost. A man adrift in the aftermath of choices gone horribly wrong. The judge's gavel fell. As judgment was read, orders were issued to return the Harper Ranch to Emily's care, to grant restitution, and to open a criminal investigation into the most egregious acts. Outside the courthouse, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky with gold and fire. Emily emerged, flanked by supporters. The town was still raw with tension and divided loyalties, but everywhere Emily looked, she saw nods of respect and gratitude. A slow, uncertain healing, yes, but also hope. For the first time since her father's death, Willow Creek was ready to learn the cost and value of truth. The trial was over, but the real work, Emily knew, was only beginning. She took a long breath, letting the heavy courtroom doors close behind her. Justice had been served. Now, it was time to rebuild. Justice revealed. The verdict echoed long after the courtroom had emptied. As the late summer evening slipped into night, Willow Creek buzzed with the aftershocks of the trial. For years, rumors and doubts had drifted through the town like dust in the wind, whispers of betrayal, uneasy questions about John Harper's death, the scandal that had cast out his only daughter. Now, with the gavel's final blow, truth had emerged from the shadows, and justice, real, irreversible, began its slow, redemptive work. For Emily, the first hours after the verdict settled were strangely calm. She sat alone in her temporary room at Mrs. Lopez's bed and breakfast, hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee, replaying every step that had led her back to this moment. Law textbooks hunched over in Houston, sleepless nights tracing bank records, the tense silence of the witness stand, the raw faces of family members she would never trust again. Every memory felt sharper now, delivered in the clear light of vindication. The town, too, wore the change openly. There was no raucous celebration, no parading through the streets. Instead, justice announced itself in subtler ways. A few old neighbors who had kept their distance now knocked on her door, offering tentative congratulations or heartfelt apologies for having doubted her. The local paper ran a solemn headline, "Harper Verdict Restores Family Legacy." At the market, familiar faces greeted Emily with careful smiles that balanced respect with apology. But if justice satisfies, it also unsettles. News of Margaret and Daniel's downfall spread fast. With assets seized and reputations ruined, their supporters seemed suddenly scarce. The once proud matriarch of the Harper family sat stone-faced in her house, visited by lawyers and ignored by townsfolk, who no longer dared to speak her name above a whisper. Daniel, stripped of status and prospects, retreated from the public eye entirely, a man forced, finally, to reckon with the cost of his ambitions. Emily, meanwhile, was thrust into the center of a new reality. She had won, but victory carried its own complex burdens. Her father's legacy, once stolen, now reclaimed, came with fields grown wild, a ranch gutted by neglect and legal battles, and the living memory of a community still recovering from old wounds. She faced stacks of paperwork, knots of unpaid ranch hands, and angry creditors, all reminding her that justice in the courtroom was only the first step toward true repair. Yet, as the sun rose the next morning, casting long, golden beams over the dew-silvered grass, Emily felt something previously unimaginable. The weight of guilt and suspicion replaced by pride and freedom. Standing on the front steps of the Harper Ranch house, its paint peeling, but its silhouette strong against the endless sky, she greeted Ben and the handful of loyal workers who had remained through the storms. That morning's meeting was somber but determined. "We can't fix everything overnight," Emily said, voice steady. "But this is our home now. If you're willing, I want you here. The Harper name means something again, not just because of me, but because we kept fighting." One after another, hands roughened by years of labor, gripped hers in a show of solidarity, loyalty, and, at last, trust. Ben, his eyes wet, tipped his hat and said, "John would be proud, Emily. Not for how you won, but for why you fought." Throughout the following days, the process of restoring order and hope was painstaking. Emily found herself both welcomed and questioned. Every decision, hiring old workers, paying debts, reopening negotiations with local suppliers, held the weight of the past and the promise of a different future. There were moments of doubt. Anonymous notes in her mailbox hinted that not everyone was ready to forgive, that some believed she had simply outmaneuvered her family rather than serve justice. But the real measure of justice lay in actions, not words. Emily reached out to townsfolk who had been harmed by Margaret's schemes, quietly making amends wherever she could. She visited the widow of the bookkeeper who had helped her, bringing flowers and a thank you, listening to stories about her father's generosity. She sent letters to former ranch employees, inviting them back and vowing fair pay and honest work. The Harper Ranch, under her hand, would become not just a monument to survival, but a refuge from the secrets and suspicions that had once defined it. And Willow Creek noticed. Saturday evenings at the local church grew from tense to warm. The preacher's sermons gradually shifted from warnings about greed and pride to messages of reconciliation. Children who had once been warned to stay away from that Harper girl now played tag beneath the giant oak at the ranch's edge, laughing as Emily joined them when work allowed. One afternoon, as Emily sorted through dusty boxes of her father's things, she found a photograph, her as a little girl on horseback, her father steadying the reins with a gentle hand. On the back, he had written in looping, careful script, "For Emily, may you always ride proud." Tears sprang hot and fresh, but this time they were not for loss. They were for grace, for memory reclaimed, and for the possibility of beginnings carved from pain. The legal consequences of the trial reverberated far beyond personal redemption. Margaret and Daniel faced not just civil judgment, but criminal investigation. Their assets were liquidated to pay damages owed the estate and those harmed by their deceit. The local prosecutor, once hesitant to challenge the old guard, now pursued the case with new courage, heartened by the transparency Emily had demanded throughout the ordeal. The scandal, instead of blighting Emily's reputation, became a lesson retold across the region. A cautionary tale, yes, but also a story about the necessity and cost of justice. Reporters, at first hungry for gossip, now sought Emily's opinion on town affairs, stewardship of family land, and the meaning of justice in changing times. She answered with humility, always crediting her team, the workers, and her father's memory rather than claiming the spotlight herself. "Justice is never quick, and it's never easy," she told one young journalist. "But it's the only thing that lets us look each other in the eye again." As summer faded toward fall, the Harper Ranch regained its rhythm. The fields were cleared and sown anew. The barns echoed again with laughter and music during weekend gatherings. At the first harvest, when neighbors helped bring in the hay, Emily stepped back and watched as the town she once feared had turned, slowly, into a place she could call home. There were still those who whispered, but their voices faded amid the chorus of hope and community that had begun to swell once more. For Emily, justice was no longer just a verdict or a victory in court. She had reclaimed her name, cleared her father's legacy, and brought light into the darkest corners of Willow Creek. She understood now more than ever that real justice was a living, daily practice, measured in honesty, forgiveness, and courage. And as dusk painted the sky in shades of copper and indigo, she knew, for the first time in years, peace had finally come to the Harper land. Closing the past, beginning anew, Emily Harper stood at the edge of her family's land, the horizon tinged with the golden light of early autumn. The fields, once choked with neglect, whispered in a gentle breeze, alive again with possibility. For a long moment, she let the air fill her lungs, grounding herself in the rolling Texas landscape that had shaped and haunted her in equal measure. After years of accusation, struggle, and heartbreak, she finally felt more than the burden of duty. She felt belonging. The legal war, though victorious, had left scars on the ranch and across Emily's spirit. Inside the house, empty rooms and scarred floorboards bore silent witness to what the Harper family had endured. And yet, with each passing day, those scars were also being reclaimed, transformed from reminders of pain into markers of what had survived. Emily's first acts as rightful owner were not grand or symbolic. She dove into the ordinary texture of rebuilding, hammering a broken gate alongside Ben, the longtime foreman, combing the barn with new hired hands as they sorted equipment neglected by Margaret's regime, arranging for repairs on water pipes that had burst in previous winters. Sweat stung her eyes, but her heart ached less now, the rhythm of honest work stitching new meaning into the land. She faced financial obstacles head-on, negotiating with banks who had grown leery over years of legal confusion. Patiently, she sorted debts and consolidated what could be salvaged. Emily often worked late into the night, invoices and ledgers spread out before her, learning the language of running a ranch, not just in theory, but in hard, daily choices. Bills were paid, overdue wages settled, small lines of credit repaired. For every old creditor who welcomed her, there were two who refused. But she met both with the same clarity and resolve, never promising what she couldn't give, but always fighting to find a path forward. Early on, Emily resolved to create a new culture on the Harper Ranch, rooted in fairness and respect. She met with every employee, listening to their grievances and ideas. There were apologies, some hesitant, some overflowing, on both sides as old wounds were aired. She took on community outreach, organizing meals in the barn, with potluck tables stretching the length of the aisle, where ranch hands and their families, townsfolk, and neighbors mingled for the first time in years with genuine laughter. The ranch's kitchen, once silent, pulsed to life as Emily welcomed interns from the local agricultural college, eager to blend tradition with innovation. Under her stewardship, neglected pastures were carefully rotated, native wildflowers encouraged at the margins to restore soil lost during Margaret's tenure. She experimented with sustainable practices, working with agricultural experts to reduce water runoff and diversify crops, a far cry from the monoculture that had overworked the land for decades. Local business owners, the same who had once whispered and doubted, slowly began inviting her to chamber meetings and supplier gatherings, creating fragile but real networks of support. Within the town itself, Emily made amends wherever she could, not seeking universal forgiveness, but choosing honesty over pride. She met with the elderly preacher who had consoled her as a child at her father's funeral, listened without argument as he spoke of trust and reconciliation. One Saturday, she attended a picnic at the town square, not as a symbol of scandal or legal victory, but as a neighbor, bearing a homemade cobbler. Children, once told not to speak her name, now raced to show off painted horseshoes and barn kittens, unfamiliar with the bitterness their parents once harbored. For Emily, true healing meant revisiting the places of greatest pain with open eyes. She walked the lonely trail bordering the creek where she used to ride as a girl, her father's stories echoing in her mind. She lingered at the fence line she and Daniel had painted together in happier times, and, standing alone amidst the cicadas, whispered a wordless goodbye to the brother she had lost to greed and fear. There were moments of grief so sharp they stole her breath, but she allowed herself to feel them, to let tears cleanse what pride had buried deep inside. Letters trickled in from distant relatives, some rooting for her, others offering reluctant apologies or silent requests for peace. Margaret's name was rarely mentioned now, but Emily sent word through attorneys that she had no intention of erasing the family's matriarchal legacy from records, only that the truth had to remain whole for reconciliation to be real. Quietly, she funded a small scholarship in her father's name at the local high school, earmarked for students whose families had suffered hardship. She also supported Ben's daughter, dreaming of the veterinary school she once thought impossible, allowing another legacy to mend what had nearly been destroyed. Every change, no matter how hopeful, carried weight. Emily sometimes awoke in the quiet hours before dawn, heart pounding with anxiety over the next storm, the next deal, or simply the ghosts that surfaced when she closed her eyes. But she was not alone anymore. Callie, her tenacious investigator turned friend, visited on weekends, and together they talked long into the night about law, justice, and the future. Old friends from Houston drove out when they could, bringing urban energy and laughter. The newest generations of Harper workers, now part of her vision, stayed late around barn bonfires, sharing music and dreams, the boundaries of class and family softening. One evening, as a full moon rose above the orchard, Emily gathered those closest to her for a simple celebration. No speeches, just barbecued brisket, watermelon slices, and the easy rhythms of a band playing country tunes under the stars. There, surrounded by the people who'd chosen to stand with her, she felt the past slip its hold, not vanishing, but loosening, becoming a foundation rather than a burden. Standing at the edge of that circle, Emily looked out over her land and realized that closure was never absolute. There would always be shadows among the wildflowers, echoes of absence in the laughter. But she could breathe again, at last, as herself. A woman built as much from sorrow as from hope, shaped by both exile and belonging. The Harper Ranch was no longer a battlefield, but a home reclaimed, its future open for her to write. As dawn broke on another day, Emily saddled her father's old Mustang, a horse no one else had been able to tame, and set out to ride the boundary of her land. With each stride, each fence line crossed, she welcomed the promise of what lay ahead. In closing the past, she had not lost it. She had transformed it, carrying its lessons, pride, and pain forward. No longer defined by tragedy, but by the new beginnings she now called her own.